In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, I'm going to be giving you guys my first impressions playing the full version of the game. We got a review code about 4 days ago, so we didn't have enough time, in my opinion, to do a proper review, and I don't think it would be fair to give this game a proper review after that amount of time. So instead here, I'm just going to kind of do my first impressions after about the first 40 hours or so of the game, tell you what I think. This is going to be a completely spoiler-free review. The gameplay we'll be showing in the back room is from Act 1, so if you played Early Access, this is stuff you've probably already seen before, just with a little bit of, new UI, etc. But otherwise, you'll be very familiar with this, and I will not be talking about story spoilers at all. So we managed to get through Act 2, or what I think is the end of Act 2, because nothing pops up saying this is the beginning of Act 3 in about 40 hours. And I think the average player, someone who hasn't played Early Access, will probably take closer to 50 or 60 hours to do this. If you've played Early Access and you're familiar with Early Access, not too much has changed in the beginning part of the game. There are some differences for sure, but things will be very, very familiar to you, and it will speed up your journey through Act 1. Okay, those things out of the way, let's talk about Baldur's Gate 3. I know we haven't done enough of that on this channel recently. I know you guys are itching for more. So the first thing I think I can say about Baldur's Gate 3 is that it's the first RPG that I have felt like I didn't regret a single decision that I made. A lot of RPGs out there, you're either stuck with a good option, a neutral option, or a bad option. Maybe you don't want to go all good, or maybe you don't want to go all bad, or maybe you don't want to go neutral. And some RPGs have like 10 options, and you're just overwhelmed by the amount of options. And I think Larian did a phenomenal job here of not giving you too many options, so you're not overwhelmed, but giving you really good options that feel like there's a choice there for everyone. And what's utterly incredible about this is that there are choices there that are based on your class, that are based on your race, that are based on your background. There are so many different choices that you will get to make based on your own personal character or the character that enters into dialogue that won't be there for someone else. So even though there isn't like a million dialogue choices for every dialogue, the ones you're going to be seeing will be very tailor-made to your character. And I think that's probably the most special thing about this game, is that it feels like the game was made just for you when you're playing. And part of the reason that these dialogue options are so good, in my opinion, is because the narrative of the game is very, very strong. It's very compelling. Characters are interesting. They're well acted. You are interested in just about every single character you meet in this game, and you want to hear what they have to say. You want to learn more about the game world. There's always things you're finding out, and I can't remember the last RPG where I played where I listened to every single line that was spoken. I've played tons of RPGs. We do lots of RPGs on this channel, but I can't think of one in recent memory. Maybe the last one that was like that for me was maybe a Mass Effect game or Dragon Age Origins or something like that, where I was really pulled into the story and wanted to hear the dialogues. This is up there in terms of those and with the narrative that really draws you in, really compelling characters, and you just want to keep talking to them and finding out things. And a lot of times I forget what I'm doing. Like I'm like, where am I going? What was my quest objective? I'm just talking to people, learning information, finding out what's going on with them. And I'm actually perfectly happy to do that, spending hours doing that I typically wouldn't do in another game. And when you look at that with the frame of reference that I have very limited time to review this game before the review embargo, that I'm pressed for time, we're trying to get guides out, and yet somehow the game is still compelling me to just not give a crap about any of that. That's extremely compelling. The average person isn't going to have that, pressure on them. They're just going to play, and I think they're going to be even more immersed than I was, if that's possible. Sort of piggybacking off this, the exploration of the game also adds a ton to this. The game world is large. It's not completely open world like an open world game would be, but it kind of feels that way. But you can tell that there's like a linear narrative driving you through the game, and you're following it a bit more closely, kind of like Baldur's Gate 2 or something like that. Like there's just kind of quest objectives you're picking up along the main narrative route, and there's a lot to explore and see, and the exploration is really fun. There's always things to find if you're paying attention. You're always rewarded for finding those things, and there's just so much to do and see that you don't get bored of it. Like you're like, oh, what's around this corner? Oh, what's around this corner? And there's always stuff. Like you're always finding new things, and I guarantee you in successive playthroughs, you will find things you did not find in your first playthrough. It is almost a 100% certainty. And one thing that I found really, really special about Baldur's Gate 3 is that a lot of the NPCs and characters you interact with, particularly in the first act, a lot of times when you do a quest in an RPG, right, like you do the quest, you help them out, they give you a gold or a reward, and that's it. Thanks for playing, appreciate it, here's your reward. A lot of these characters will show up in Act 2, or at probably Act 3, I'm assuming from the way things are going, And you get to see what happens to them. You get to see, did they make it? Did they do the things they said they were going to do? What perils did they face? Are they okay? Are they not okay? And you get to see the results of your decisions. I think it's been done in a way here that's never been done in any other RPG. A lot of times in some of the best RPGs, there are characters you can interact with and their stories advance and you'll meet up with them. Usually in the same location though, like maybe they're on a world like in Mass Effect and they stay on that world and you go back and interact with them after you've done something and there's a new interaction. But these characters are moving around the game world. They're going from new locations to locations. They're advancing their story. And something that Larian has done that's really clever in this game is they've created little checkpoints throughout the game that advance events in the game world. So the world state is shifting when you hit certain points of the game, and it changes previous areas of the game that you've already been. And people were asking me pre-launch, like, when you hit one of these checkpoints and it says, like, warning, like, wrap up everything you're doing before advancing, can you go backward? And the answer is, yes, you can. You might not find things exactly the way they were once you go past one of these checkpoints, though. Things may be different than what you remember them being, and I feel like that's incredibly special. Like, how many RPGs does that happen in? And I don't even know, like, all the ramifications of hitting all of these different checkpoints because there's so many variations. I think it's going to be months before we know what they all are, but that was incredible for me. And the narration of the game is absolutely on point. It's outstanding. The voice acting is incredibly done, and it adds something to the game. I don't think narration is something every RPG needs, but when it's done really well, like it's done in this game and it's done well in the DOS series, it makes you wonder, is it something that other RPGs need? Because it's like music, right? When a game has phenomenal music, Baldur's Gate 3 has phenomenal music, but when a game has phenomenal music, it makes the game better. But you don't necessarily have to have phenomenal music in a game for it to be good. So it's one of those things I feel like the narrator really adds something to the game, and I think people are really, really going to enjoy this aspect. If you've played Early Access, then you know what I mean, but it just continues to be good the whole way. If there is one critique here that I want to point out, though, it's that the game does such a fantastic job of immersing you to the game world that when you hit a bug, it really pulls you out of that immersion. It's kind of like being in a trance and someone snaps their fingers right next to you and you wake up. That's kind of what it feels like. And there were a good number of bugs in this game so far from what I've seen. I was a bit worried about this after playing in Ghent because I saw a lot of bugs there, and I know they've been doing a lot of work on those bugs over the last few weeks, and they've pushed a patch every single day, patching bugs out of the game since we've been playing the review copy. So I think these bugs are just going to get wiped out over time, and none of them was major. They're just like really bizarre bugs in a lot of cases, and I'll just give you a couple examples. Like one time during character creation, the firebolt cantrip just disappeared from the screen and I couldn't select it anymore with the character, even though I should have been able to. That was bizarre. I've had a dialogue when I was in the Grove just go to black screen for like 30 seconds. And I was like, what's happening? Some of the casting animations for spells have weird bugs with their animations. Like I had like a weird audio sound when I was disarming traps, like in one specific spot of the game where it'd make like a really loud noise. And then it never appeared in the rest of the game. When I was in the Shadowed Lands, like, I would load into the game, my torch would be lit, which, if you're in the Shadowed Lands, it's important to have a torch. But then when I'd load into the game again on the exact same save, it wouldn't be lit, and then my character would find itself in a bad situation. But then if I reloaded it, it would be back lit again, and sometimes it wouldn't be. The same thing happened with, like, Wizards when he's in your camp. Sometimes when I loaded into the game, he would be there, and other times he wouldn't, like, from the exact same save. So they're just really strange bugs like this. Nothing's like particularly bad or game-breaking at all, but they're really specifically bizarre bugs, and I did run into a good number of things like this throughout the game, and I think these are going to get patched out slowly. And the only reason I mention it is because it can break your immersion because you are so immersed in the game. Talking a bit about the controls, how they felt on controller, they did a really good job, in my opinion, of playing this game on controller. It's very intuitive. It takes you a little bit to get used to. And I think players playing on controller are going to be just fine doing it. Again, there's a little bit of time that it takes to kind of get your muscle memory down with it because there's a lot of things you can do. But one thing I kind of wish they would have done with the controller UI is given you a lot more information that's like readily available on your screen. You kind of got to go hunting through, you know, things in order to find the information that you can find more easily when you're playing with mouse and keyboard. So if I had one little gripe about it, it'd be that. But otherwise, they did a fantastic job here. There's like a completely different UI for controller. They must have just completely redesigned it, which I think players will find very intuitive and easy to use. And the last thing I want to talk a little bit about, which I know is a popular topic for Baldur's Gate 3, is romance. Ever since the infamous bear scene, I think people have been talking about this a lot, and I will say that There is a fair bit of romance and sex in this game, and I think that's a serious understatement. I have never seen so much in an RPG, so much freedom in terms of what you can do and who you can romance and how many people you can romance. I actually feel like it's, believe it or not, harder to not romance and fall into a sex scene than it is to do it. Like, if I almost was tempted to like make a guide how to not have romance in Baldur's Gate 3, because if you're like, oh, I like this character and I want to be with this character, you really got to dodge some advances from other characters if you are interacting with them regularly. And I almost feel like that needs a guide in general, so you're not accidentally doing something that you don't want to do, or maybe you do want to do. I don't know. But there is a lot of romance and sex in this game, and I think it's refreshing to see that an RPG isn't limiting creative expression in that way, because players can, you know, they can have the freedom to do that. I mean, that's part of role-playing, in my opinion. Finding a character that you have a bond with and exploring that is definitely something I feel like should be in more RPGs. And you play games like, I don't know, The Outer Worlds or something like that, where like there's no romance. You're like, this is just not realistic at all. Like, they played it so safe in that game when it came to romance. This game is the complete opposite. But I would say, you know, if you have young kids or something like that, probably don't play when they're around. It is a very adult RPG, and even though there are filters for these sort of things, just to give you an idea, I don't want to get into any spoilers or anything like that, but you can make your whole party naked and run around through the whole game naked with all of your characters, including all cutscenes and combat. I've never seen that before in a game in my life, so that's something you can absolutely do if you want. So in summary, to wrap it up, Baldur's Gate 3 is almost exactly what I expected so far. A very story-driven, heavily narrative game that makes you make tough decisions, but you also get to see the outcomes of those decisions in a story that feels like it's tailor-made for you, and that no two players will have the exact same experience. Baldur's Gate 3 is a game that I very publicly and definitively have been stating will win Game of the Year. I haven't been saying it should win Game of the Year, or it could win Game of the Year. I've literally been saying it's going to win Game of the Year, and after seeing what I've seen so far, I still believe this is the case. We will probably have a full review of the game out in the next week, so if you want to see what our actual review score for the game is and whether I actually still think it'll be Game of the Year after the full game, make sure you stay tuned for that. But I'll just say the only slight concern I have is the bugs, and these aren't that bad. These are things that are going to get patched out over time, so a couple weeks from now they probably won't even exist. I've had no performance issues in 40 hours, not a single frame drop. I've had 0 crashes in over 40 hours. The load times are lightning fast. I've had no sound issues, nothing like that. Other than a few bugs here and there, the game runs like a dream. Stay tuned for our full review. What do you guys think so far? If you're playing the game, let me know in the comments below.